Hello and welcome to the M.B.Om podcast, where you'll learn to master the business of yoga. M.B.Om is a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith. I'm a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, a yoga business coach, and a total business geek. Here at M.B.Om, you'll learn everything you need to know to create a sustainable yoga business by learning from myself and guests from around the world about how they built their yoga businesses, and about how you too can become a successful yoga teacher, studio owner, and much more. All right, let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the M.B.Om podcast. I am grateful that you were here joining me today. And this week on the podcast, I am joined by Jen Corley. You guys have heard Jen on the podcast twice before because she heads the wellness travel division at WeTravel. And I've had her on the show twice to talk about yoga retreats and how to run yoga retreats, the future of yoga retreats, and lots of good stuff. Jen is also mom to 2 little boys, so we're doing kind of a part 2 of last week's episode, talking about planning for maternity leave. So in this episode, Jen shares how she prepared for both of her maternity leaves, including how much time she took off, how she prepared to be covered when she works on a small team, how she's transitioned back into working, childcare, and more. And she shares some really great tips for motherhood and maternity leave in this episode, so it's a really good one. And I really enjoyed talking to Jen because Jen works full-time for WeTravel. So her situation is a little bit different from Kelly Smith's last week, if you heard that episode, and also a little bit different from mine. But because I both run my own business and also consult with some clients, I felt like it would be really interesting to kind of hear how she managed, training people who are going to cover her and making sure that all of her tasks were covered while she was offline, and then also navigating, the conversations of talking to bosses and that type of thing, because that can be a little bit different than if you just work entirely for yourself and you never have to run anything by, somebody else that you're working with. So she's got a little bit of a different perspective on maternity leave. And on top of that, having a second child, she's been able to navigate this twice. So we had a really good conversation. And if you are family planning or perhaps expecting right now, this is a really awesome episode. Before we dive into this episode, I just wanted to give a quick little shout out to the sponsor for today's episode of the podcast, OfferingTree. You guys hear me talk about OfferingTree all the time and how much I love them. So I want to share a little testimonial from somebody else who loves them just as much as me. This is from Charlene, who teaches meditation and yoga. And this is what she had to say about the OfferingTree community. The Facebook group is great for seeing what others are doing and for support from OfferingTree staff. I love that OfferingTree asks and listens to what their customers need and do their best to accommodate. One example, I didn't know anything about integration, but saw a customer in the Facebook group ask about it. The instructions provided were excellent, and also links for further info on OfferingTree.com were given. I was not afraid to try it because all of the support I'd received to date from OfferingTree has created a trust that I could make it happen. And, this is just one of the things that I love about OfferingTree as well. So I'll tell you more about OfferingTree later on in this episode, but make sure you do go check them out, OfferingTree.com/M.B.Om. All right, let's get into it. Without further ado, here's Jen. Welcome to the podcast today, Jen. I'm excited to have you here with me.
Hey, Amanda. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the last time we chatted was the beginning of the pandemic. We were talking about retreats. I think we thought travel was coming back faster than it was at the time. It was still 2020. And our conversations have always really revolved around the business of retreats. And we're going to have a bit of a different chat today, which I'm pretty excited about. We're going to have a mom chat about maternity leaves, prepping for all of that in our yoga businesses. And I'm really excited to dive into that because I know it's going to be really helpful for me. But maybe we can start. Can you just introduce yourself for people who maybe aren't familiar with you, who haven't listened to our other episodes?
Sure. So my name is Jen, and I am a former yoga teacher, and now I work at the intersection of yoga and travel at WeTravel, which is a booking and payment platform for retreats and other group travel. So I'm lucky because I get to sort of marry my two passions for yoga and travel and wrap it all in my professional involvement. And I'm also, I remember fondly our last two discussions, and it's kind of hard to believe what's been happening in the world since we talked last. But it's, weathered through COVID, working for a travel company, having a baby, coming now back to work. So it really feels like a lot has changed since we talked last, but I'm definitely excited to be chatting about mamahood today. It's fun.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot has changed. Like, I think we talked in like June of 2020. So it's been like a good year and a half. And I mean, a lot has happened in the world and then personally for both of us. And so I'm happy to hear that WeTravel's, weathered this storm and you personally as well. Can you maybe start by telling me how old your kids are? You have two kids, right?
I've got two kids, Oscar and Tony, two little boys. My oldest is just, he's about 2 years and 8 months old. So he's definitely in the I hate calling it the terrible twos, but he's a little bit in that stage. And my youngest, Tony, is 8 months old. They're almost exactly 2 years apart. And he's doing great. And he is just getting into the swing of being used to mom being back at work.
Yeah. How long have you been back at work now for?
So I came back, my timing coming back from maternity was really fortunate. It was at the end of October, and our company, because we're all remote and distributed, we do an offsite or team retreat every year. And so the kind of last week of October, first week of November, that's when I was getting back into my role full time, and I got to come back with my first week back at that retreat. So it's been about 6 weeks now, I guess. But yeah, still transitioning, but it was a really good opportunity to meet all the hires that we'd made since I'd been gone and kind of get a quick update in a week. So I was lucky that way.
Yeah. And take like a little trip somewhere.
Yes. Yeah. We went to Turkey. It was amazing. First international travel I had done since the pandemic, and a lot was different, but it felt really good to get back out there.
Yeah, no, that's really awesome to hear. And so since you've done this twice, I feel like you've got probably so much goodness and wisdom to share with me. I'm curious if we can start with like the process of planning for a maternity leave. And I know in the US, it's like not very typical that, I guess like companies or, solopreneurs would just get a maternity leave. And it's actually a little bit different in Canada. Like if I worked for a business full time, I would probably be just getting time off, but I work for myself. So I need to plan this out a little bit more strategically in terms of how I pay myself and making sure I can take time away, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, maybe we can start with that planning phase, because I feel like that's where I am right now. I'm about 2 months out from giving birth. And so really in like the depths of what needs to happen before this baby comes so that I can go offline.
Yeah, I remember feeling super intimidated by the prospect of planning for an extended timeout. I do work for a company rather than being fully self-employed, but I feel like I'm probably a little bit in the same boat as you and a lot of your listeners in terms of there's not a whole, we're a lean startup, and generally speaking, it's sort of, there's not a whole lot of redundancy to cover what I have going on when I'm out of the office on maternity leave. So yeah, I really had to think about it in terms of what are the absolute essential non-negotiable things that I do on a day-to-day basis that somebody is going to need to take the reins for me. So sort of that categorizing process is like, think of all of the things that you have going on, all the like different balls you have in the air, and decide like which ones you can maybe afford to drop for the moment and which ones you need to pass off to somebody else who can help and support, kind of keep the lights on for certain business endeavors that you have going on. So I think that sort of like mapping out of responsibilities is probably where I started. And then from there, fairly sort of mundane, just I used a lot of Google Docs. So I would write down, okay, here's this task that I'm doing. Here's what I have the goals for it related to it in the next year. Maybe I want to bring somebody in to manage this part of it. Maybe this part of it, I'll set a reminder in my calendar or snooze an email from 6 months or so out. So really like kind of just this careful cataloging was the early part of the process. And I probably started that, like almost as soon as I, maybe midway through my pregnancy. So I had a good several months that I was still in the office that I was able to kind of do the mapping part. So I was really glad I didn't save that to the end. That was like actually one thing that I did well the first time around.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's kind of when I started planning to like, I feel like pregnancy is so strange because you spend the first like couple months of like, is this real? Like going to the doctor, getting an ultrasound, like kind of waiting. I feel like for me, I was like, okay, I want to get past this like 12-week mark and, hopefully lower the risk of anything, bad happening with the baby. And then it was like, oh, okay, now I'm spending my time like telling people this is so exciting. And then I'm like, oh my God, I've got a baby coming in like 4 months. I should start planning for maternity leave now. And, I feel like that mapping and organizing of tasks has been really important for me. I've used a lot of Google Docs and Google Sheets as well. And it's so crazy when you start looking at all the things you do and then all the things as well, because there's some roles that I have like consulting gigs and stuff where I'm training somebody else and it's like trying to dump all of the information out of my brain is just like so much. It's like then I realize, oh, and there's this other thing and there's this other thing I do and this other thing I know. And oh, right, I should probably tell you about this too. And it's just continuous, honestly.
Totally. I think, and then another piece that comes maybe some way, when you're far enough into the pregnancy, you feel comfortable disclosing that you're pregnant, is just really to kind of communicate. If you're within a team, start to communicate with people about, what you might want them to take on, ask them to kind of, maybe if you're working on a project, loop them in a little bit just so that they have the chance to watch a few of the processes unfold in real time. So without overwhelming them, taking too much of their time, kind of just communicating as much as possible on the front end. And then also it's kind of a weird one right now, especially because we're not seeing, people face to face quite as much. But if you have clients, students that you're working with, prepare them for the time you're going to be out and help them just understand what the transition in and out is going to look like, so that it's a natural kind of flow. If you have somebody taking over your classes or that kind of thing, they don't just turn up and all of a sudden go, where did Amanda go?
Yeah, for sure. Letting people know, I feel like is kind of huge. And it's kind of strange to like plan for that timing. Like, it's like, when is the right time to let somebody know that you're going to be away? And I've feel like I've done it in stages so far. And I feel like now I'm at the point where I think most people I work with know, because we're like, having to hire people and for certain roles that I do, and I need to train people and stuff. So it's like everyone kind of needs to know at this point, but it's really been in stages up until now, because there's some people who just haven't really needed to know up until this point of like, okay, I'll be offline in the next like 4 to 6 weeks.
Right. Yeah. And I feel like getting to that point that you feel sort of ready to step away. For me, I was really not sure. I'm thinking kind of like the months leading up to when I actually stopped working. My first pregnancy, I thought I would be really restless and like needing an outlet for my energy. So I actually planned to work kind of right up until my pregnancy the first time around. And I totally, because I'm a little bit type A, like I like to be busy. I enjoy it. But I got really, really tired in my third trimester. And I ended up in the US, or at least in California, you can take a month of paid leave before you have your baby. And so I didn't think I was going to want or need to do that. And I absolutely did. And it was lucky that I had planned enough in advance that I actually could step away a little bit earlier than I had been expecting to. Because I think it's just really hard, especially if it's the first time you're pregnant, not knowing how you're going to feel physically, emotionally, and just, hopefully with enough advance planning. And also some people end up having their babies earlier than they expect. So it's a good thing not to push it off too long for all the procrastinators out there.
Yeah, no, that's a good piece of advice, because it is hard to know when your baby's going to come. And I feel like the advice I've heard the most is, or I guess like what I've heard the most is, your baby usually comes late when it's your first.
I wasn't super early, but I was my mom's first and I came 5 days early. So I'm like, well, it's not always a rule of thumb. And then I actually have some friends whose baby ended up coming like a month early. And I feel like for me, that was like, the difference between January 2nd and February 2nd for me is like pretty big in terms of what I'm planning for being offline. So I was like, okay, maybe I should be wrapping up like more of my projects by the end of the year and then giving myself like a longer grace period. And I think you're right too. Like, it's like, I have no idea how I'm going to feel in a month. I feel like based on how I feel around 32 weeks, I think I'm going to be pretty tired. So giving that time and space, I think is really important. For your second, did you decide to do like that 1 month out again? Like, did you just kind of plan for that with your second?
Yeah, absolutely. I did. So I planned to take the full month, and I actually planned to take this for my actual leave. I'm not sure if I mentioned already, I took 6 months with my first child, and I ended up actually taking 7 months with my second. So that's another thing to consider. One overarching tip I would just give is say, grant yourself some grace in terms of if you feel like you have a plan and then you want to change your mind. Hopefully you have the right systems and the right support in place to have that flexibility. But I was really hard on myself, just, not being sure, like wanting to take that time desperately to be with my child and my children, but then also feeling like, oh, but a whole nother month is going to go by and I'm going to fall behind. But it's a cliche, but you like can't get the time back with your baby. So for me, that was the right thing to do. And I was lucky that I was supported by a team that was really understanding of needing a little bit more time the second time around.
Yeah, for sure. Did you feel like having like 6-7 months off was like enough time?
For me, I did. I have a lot of colleagues that are in Europe, in countries where a year is absolutely the norm. And then, of course, I'm American. So here we really don't have, we're hopefully moving in that direction. But we really, the norm is quite short, probably 2 months for a lot of women is all they get. And so it's very individual, I think, for sure. For me, because I think like this probably would resonate with entrepreneurs, but any kind of startup or entrepreneurial environment, things move so quickly that I felt a little bit nervous about being out longer than 6 months. So having a real commitment to what I was doing and loving what I was doing, but balancing that against just wanting to, take the time to heal, to spend time with my babies. And yeah, for me, 7 months was about the right amount of time. But if I had a slower paced job, I probably would have taken longer, to be honest.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the 12 months is pretty standard for maternity leave in Canada, and you can even extend to like 18 months. Your pay is like doesn't go past the 12 months normally for your job, but you can opt for the 18 months, which is amazing, especially if you work in an office and maybe you want to breastfeed for that period of time and stuff like that. I think that's a really great opportunity. I think for me as an entrepreneur, I've been more looking at that, like, kind of taking the month before the baby's due to just settle, make food for myself, really just rest, kind of get into like the vibes of birthing and then into motherhood, and then looking at like kind of planning for between like 4 and 6 months fully offline, and then just seeing where everything's at. Cause I think this is again, like something that's so hard when you haven't done this before is like, and obviously you're not going to know what your baby's going to be like regardless, even if you've had, 6 babies before. But I feel like just really having no concept of like, is she going to sleep at all? Like, how's she going to feed? What are things going to be like in 4 months? Am I going to be really feeling like, exactly like you said, I want this time with her and I don't want to spend this time working. So it's hard to know what like the mindset is going to be like in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so true. And like, I had 2 very different, like, temperaments of baby, first time and second time. My first guy was a lot harder, more colicky, more fussy. And then now my second one is just like all smiles all the time, and he's really easy to take care of, but he doesn't sleep well. So it's like, yeah, every pregnancy has its own set of challenges. Every newborn has a different sort of flavor and mothering experience and requirements. So yeah, I think giving yourself a little bit of just kind of permission to be flexible, and the kind of practical advice I would give to back up that piece of advice would just be, especially if you're an entrepreneur, really, if you're thinking about getting pregnant or you're early in the pregnancy, like just to save a little bit, because it's also, for my job, they were very flexible about how much leave I got, but I didn't get, unlimited paid leave. So I took quite a bit of it was unpaid leave. And yeah, I just had to kind of build that into financially planning for taking that time away, and then financially planning for childcare. Because again, that's something in the US that it's not well supported or subsidized by the government. So it's a pretty big outlay for a lot of moms finding childcare. But it's so important because to find good childcare that is sufficient to not make you have to juggle baby care and working simultaneously, because I did a little bit of that myself during COVID, and it's really tough. So to preserve your sanity and to make you a good mama, a good present mama when you are with your baby, it's great to have the freedom to really focus on your work during the hours when that's what your main focus is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had another mom chat with another yoga teacher and business owner, and she said the exact same thing. Like she said, she just had her first a year ago, and she was saying that she did try to kind of juggle like working during nap times or working, while he was sleeping or after kind of he was in bed. And she's like, honestly, like it was really hard because I was just pulled in two directions. And she's like, now with childcare, I have my work hours where I'm like dedicated to my work. And then I have my like mom time where I'm not doing my work. Like I'm not looking at my emails or trying to multitask things. It's like I'm fully present with one or the other. And she said that was way, way easier.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely for me something that I'm not used to, structuring my time in a really, really consistent, highly regimented way, because I've always worked remotely and I've loved that about my job, having a flexible schedule. So it was definitely a new skill that I had to learn to really like compartmentalize my time better and to kind of work during normal working hours. But it's just, motherhood requires patience and flexibility in kind of all arenas. And so just getting used to a new way of working. Once I got used to it, especially the second time around, it was a lot easier. So I agree with the guest that you had before 100%.
Awesome. Yeah, that's good to know, because I think that that's one thing I've been like a little bit uncertain about is like what childcare will look like when I do go back to work. And I, being the person that I am, I'm a little bit type A too. I'm like, well, I can probably just do some work like while she naps and while she sleeps and stuff like that, which I mean, maybe if she's a really good sleeper, that's possible. But I think it sounds like it's better to, maybe bring some childcare in, like get a nanny or something like that if I want to be going back to work, so that I can really just like focus on one and then the other and not be pulled in two directions. And I mean, yeah, I've had pretty bad pregnancy brain the last like couple of weeks. And so I'm just imagining myself getting even less sleep and having like the actual concerns of keeping a human alive that are like obviously going to be on my mind. That's going to make it even harder to focus on work.
Yeah. I mean, it's so funny. The pregnancy brain 100% happened to me too. And it's really like, I normally think of myself as having good attention to detail and not dropping the ball on things. And yeah, I did a few things that really surprised myself in a scary way, where I was like, wow, I'm usually not this scattered. So I will say, after the pregnancy, for me, the pregnancy brain didn't like fully recede right away. But I think it was more that there's just like so many things in your brain when you're expecting. And then after you're dealing with being a mom for the first time or the second time or the 10th time. But you do get, not to contradict the point that we just made, but you also do get really good at like juggling a million things at once. Like I think women have this like inherent superpower that like we basically as mothers become able to take what the world throws at us. And so I feel like I've become more efficient. I've become like a better worker in a lot of ways, notwithstanding that sometimes I have my like frazzled moments, and I just have to like let them pass and give myself a little bit of a break.
Yeah, for sure. That definitely makes sense.
Hey, yoga teachers. We're just taking a quick break from the podcast to talk about OfferingTree and memberships. If you teach regular yoga classes, do you offer a membership? When you start to have a loyal group of students who show up for you week after week, creating a membership is a great way to transition to reliable income that you can count on. You all know that I recommend OfferingTree as your online yoga business one-stop shop, and that's because OfferingTree makes it easy to set up and grow your membership on top of everything else that you're doing in your business. When you use OfferingTree, you can create memberships that include unique bundles of classes, courses, and on-demand offerings. And you can set up as many memberships as you want. You can charge clients monthly, annually, weekly, or choose your own billing cycle with OfferingTree's membership tools. And if reoccurring payments don't fit, you can also sell packages that can be refilled when needed. And as always, it's super simple to learn this aspect of OfferingTree and to set it up. So if you've been looking for an easier way to run the online part of your yoga business, definitely check out OfferingTree. It's an easy, all-in-one tool to host your website, schedule classes, private lessons, and sell memberships. And I have a special discount for you. Head on over to offeringtree.com/M.B.Om for 15% off 1 year of OfferingTree or 50% off the first 3 months. Once again, that's offeringtree.com/M.B.Om for a special discount on OfferingTree. All right, now back to the show.
And so when it comes time to like, say you're on maternity leave and you're pretty well offline, were there any tasks you were doing, or did you basically set it up so it was like, I don't need to like check my emails, I don't need to touch like anything for like these 6-7 months while I'm with Babe?
Yeah, I took, because I'm like relatively type A, I took the tact of like, I really, really want to go offline. So both times around, I did stuff like I took off of my phone, my work email, my work calendar. I, silenced, we use Slack at work to communicate internally, turned that off. And then didn't check my accounts more than probably like once a month. I would go in and just kind of do a little bit of house cleaning to make sure there wasn't something super important that needed attention. And then similarly, I'd have a check-in with my boss about once a month. It could be just a text exchange or a short informal phone conversation, but just really, really high level stuff. And also just to kind of, hey, how are you doing? How's everything going? So not at all a stressful or high stakes thing, but I do think that kind of for me, a mindful unplug from the technology piece was really helpful, because I'm the kind of person that will wake up in the morning and first thing like dive right into all my messages. And it really, really helped to just not have the visual or any of the notifications popping up or anything like that. So that's what worked for me. But I think everyone's a little bit different. And I think everyone's jobs may require different things in that regard. But I think among all the mamas I know, a lot of them, at least for an initial period, kind of do a full offline digital detox. And then some people are better at managing it maybe in the months subsequently. But I just sort of knew for me, probably the right way forward was to keep my leave long enough that I felt ready to go back, and then kind of dive back in to a long period missed, rather than sort of trying to keep tabs that whole time. But there's so many different ways to do it. That just worked for me.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like I like the idea too of like maybe checking in like once a month if you're feeling up for it too, because I think that it's nice to kind of stay in the loop with like the adult world and what's going on. And especially if you love your job or if you're running your own business, just to kind of know what's like going on. So you're not totally like wondering, but I also love the idea of like disconnecting from technology. I think that's one thing that I'll definitely need to do, is like removing emails from my phone and turning Slack off and things like that, so that I'm not just like, hey, I should just check and see what's going on and whatnot. Because I feel like I am kind of that like curious type A personality where I'd be like, is everything running smoothly without me? And I think there's also too, like, since I work mostly for myself, like some of that, I guess, like trust a little bit, like maybe trust issues, like trusting that everyone's got it while I'm offline, when I'm usually the one that's like kind of orchestrating everything. And I've got great people in place to take that on. So I think I do just really need to step back and trust that they've got it.
Yeah, for me, the whole out of sight, out of mind mentality was definitely the easier way to go. I think the only area that I had a little bit of trouble with fully disconnecting is that some of my social media accounts are either personal accounts that occasionally there's a work crossover, or work accounts that so that was the only area where I didn't want to totally not be on social media for 6+ months, but I also didn't want work to creep in an unintended way. So yeah, to the extent any of your listeners have social media that plays both like a personal and professional function, that's one of the only areas that I struggled to find a balance. And I did get some kind of work related inputs coming in from social media, but it felt acceptable, and like it wasn't too much of a distraction. But I had to go through a little bit of a unplug from social media during the first like few weeks and even few months.
Mm-hmm. People are like, you're not responding to your emails. I thought I'd DM you on Instagram.
Yeah. And a good away message, depending on how many people you have covering. Mine was hopefully not too long, but relatively, hopefully helpful in terms of, okay, if you have this kind of thing, here's who you can go to. So yeah, I didn't get too much feedback that people were confused or left hanging. But yeah, that's one thing to consider, like thinking about, just in case your baby comes early, to think about your away message a little bit.
I already drafted mine.
That's great. Good job.
Yeah, they're not set up yet, but they are already drafted. I was kind of going through a process of like deciding what day I was going to like fully go offline and set the out of office responders with like more details and information and stuff. And so I'll get those set up soon. But yeah, that was actually one of the first things I did, was just looking at like, okay, who's checking emails while I'm away? What are things that can just like help people find what they need pretty quickly? Like, so if somebody doesn't respond for like 3, 4, 5 days, are they at least getting some questions answered and stuff like that? So yeah, hopefully I've got that covered. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about like getting back into work. So we've talked, about kind of planning and then actually being on maternity leave. And, as you were kind of approaching the end of your maternity leave, like what was kind of like the mental space like were you feeling like, hey, I'm ready to get childcare set up again, I'm ready to go back to work? Or where were you at personally?
Yeah. So I mentioned before that I was lucky to have this team retreat as like kind of the container for my reentry back into the workforce. That actually timed both times. We typically do it in the fall, and I had my babies in the spring. So it worked out for me that I got this really like nice way to transition back. But I think the major learning for me, when I came back with my first, I asked if I could come back part-time. And a lot of mamas say, oh, that sounds really ideal. That was great. For me, that was actually really hard, because I lined up childcare, half-time during the week. I said, okay, I will work these hours and I won't work when baby's home with me. And as we also touched on earlier, I just wasn't very good at rigidly adhering to work hours on, off work hours. And so the learning for me was that I just really needed to be quite strict about keeping to the schedule that I set for myself. And then making sure that the childcare that I had was all of the hours I'd commit to for working, plus, like, if it's at all financially possible, a few extra, because there's still like the groceries that you have to get, or the laundry that you have to pick up, or whatever. And one thing I hadn't really figured in was just how much more difficult and time consuming those random life errands can be when you have a baby in tow, especially if it's your first and you're still like, I remember The first time I packed my kid up to go to the grocery store, it literally took me like an hour. And you get much faster at it, of course, as time goes by. But yeah, making sure that you have like a little bit of wiggle room to do all of the random stuff that you need to do that's not purely work. So I would say, yeah. And then as I was coming back in to work full time, just mundane stuff that I did, I set up meetings with like kind of everybody I worked with in different areas to have a check-in on how things had been going on the tasks that they'd been covering for me, what sort of like follow-up items or issues did I need to kind of process right away, what was less urgent. So that was kind of the first week or so, just kind of taking a pulse for where things had been and figuring out how to map my transition. So the transition back became a little bit similar similar relative to the transition in, because it was sort of like inventory taking and then kind of blocking and tackling what was most urgent, and then so on and so forth. And the other thing I did that I didn't mention before, but when I had ideas about stuff I wanted to do in the future, because we were talking about pregnancy brain, I wrote everything in a Google Doc so that when I came back into the office, I had it written and I didn't have to try to like rack my brains to remember ideas that had, not, so they wouldn't get orphaned essentially. So I went back into that doc, and occasionally as part of that like monthly short check-in, if I had a really like exciting idea, I would throw it in that doc. So I wouldn't need to like worry about forgetting it later. So going back to that long list of just complete like word vomit, basically, of all these really fun ideas that I wanted to tackle, but knew I would have to wait for. So that was also kind of part of the process, and kind of a fun one too, because those were the things that I was like really excited to come back and take on.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. I think one of the things that's really cool about taking space from work is that we give ourselves like space for ideas to kind of come into fruition and let like creativity come. And obviously, I think taking time away from work to like take care of a baby is much different than if we're taking a sabbatical or going traveling or something like that. But I'm sure it's still like in, quiet moments in the middle of the night while you're breastfeeding, something comes to mind. And I think it's a great idea to keep like an ongoing doc of that and writing everything down. I've already been writing everything down. So I think I'll just continue with that habit so that nothing falls to the wayside over the coming months as life gets crazier. But yeah, that's really helpful to just kind of hear how you got back into things. And you said you started by going back part-time. Did you start with like working Monday through Wednesday, or like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or how did you kind of set up your schedule between like work and childcare?
Yeah, so I did it. I toyed with the idea of like, do I want to work a certain chunk daily? So I ended up opting for 3 days, like 3 essentially full days. And that worked. Again, had I been a little bit more rigid about sticking to the schedule, I would say that would have probably been easier. I have a lot of friends who are self-employed or freelancers, and they try to kind of squirrel away certain hours during nap time, like covering kind of piecemeal. And it works for some people, but just babies are so unpredictable that, that for most people, I would say having kind of like blocks of time that you can count on feels a little bit less intimidating. And I think it also depends kind of what the nature of your work is. Like you have to think about, okay, am I dealing with people in different time zones? Am I working at home versus do I need to go on location, or do I need to travel for work? So everyone's kind of journey back into the thick of things, I think, looks different relative to kind of what they have going on. But because I was remote and I had the childcare outside of my home, I had plenty of space and quiet and uninterrupted time. Just being, again, diligent about sticking to that was the major challenge. Yeah. So I think for me, I think a lot of people probably are still working relatively remotely, and that does give you an extra degree of flexibility. But at the same, and especially for if you're breastfeeding or pumping, you don't have to do the pumping if you want to feed your baby with breast milk, because that was definitely a a big time consuming thing. It's trying to pump milk. So yeah, I think you just need to like kind of step back and think about what your demands are in terms of your schedule and your time, and then hopefully figure out the childcare piece to really match that, as opposed to working back from here's when I think I can get childcare. Let me try to design my schedule around that.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. I follow somebody I think her baby is just about a year old now, and they hired a nanny, I think like maybe 20 hours a week. So like 4 hours a day type thing. And the idea was so that she could work during that time. And I think it's a little bit different now because her baby's sleeping a bit better. But while he was still kind of like sleeping pretty poorly, she was like, I thought I was going to work during these hours. And she ended up using the time for like, okay, I can like go run some errands. I can go to the gym. I can take a shower. Or like sometimes she would just sleep during that period. And she was like, it was not as glamorous as I had anticipated. She's like, I hired a nanny 20 hours a week so that I could go back to work, and ended up just like doing basic like life tasks during that time. And I felt like that was interesting. And that's just kind of to your point about like, errands taking longer, or just like, having these like added kind of tasks. We were talking before this just about like laundry, like laundry is something that it seems like when you have a baby, you just have to do like a lot more of it all the time. And it's like, you have a moment while they're sleeping, or you have some childcare, and it's like, okay, I need to do like 4 loads of laundry right now.
Yeah. You can always probably use more help than you think. My first time around, I heard this from a lot of moms, but it really became so real for me, just not being afraid to ask for help or to seek help from friends or paid help. So yeah, whatever that looks like for you, but just, I was sort of like, oh, I can do it all. And then, you get very, very tired very quickly. So definitely something to think about before you have the baby, before, you're there in the thick of it. But yeah, the period right after birth, way before you're thinking about transitioning back to work, is such a beautiful time, but also a really tough time for mamas, because like our bodies are going through so many hormonal changes. And I personally had a really, really tough time producing breast milk. And that was really heartbreaking for me. And with my second one, I had the same thing happen, but it's another instance of chugging so many ways about just cut yourself some slack. If things don't go exactly as planned with your birth, with your immediate postpartum period, or even with your transition back to work, know that it's okay. And there's no way anybody under the sun can anticipate exactly how everything's going to go. And just try to embrace whatever the universe throws at you. And hopefully it's going to be a lot of good things, even if there are some challenges thrown in there too.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great tip, because I think it's hard, especially if you are kind of more like type A, like you and I are, and you like to organize and plan and kind of have, some idea of what things are going to look like. It seems like, there's only so much we can plan for. And then we just have to be really gracious with ourselves, with our bodies, with our babies, with how we're feeling. Because it seems like it's kind of like the ultimate test of surrender, really.
It absolutely is. Yes. Oh my gosh. Couldn't agree more.
Amazing. Do you have any other, tips or pieces of advice or words of wisdom for, myself and anyone else who might be, planning for this transition in the next year in 2022?
Yeah, a few just kind of practical things. I was relatively on the later end of my group of friends to have my first baby. And so I really, really I took people out to lunch, tried to pick their brains on everything possible. Because whenever I was asking my mom questions, her constant refrain would be like, I don't remember. It was a long time ago. So definitely lean on your friends. And also to that, I joined a few Facebook groups for mamas in my area, and I got a lot of hand-me-downs through them. I got a lot of just advice on everything from picking a pediatrician to, are there any nice homeopathic remedies for when baby has a cough? So just drawing on the collective wisdom of the mamas and the families around you, it can be really empowering. And trying to think what else. And then also I had a friend who gave me I borrowed from her a cookbook, and I totally forgetting the name. I can dig it up later if you want to add it to the notes, but it was basically kind of an Ayurvedic approach to postpartum care for the mama, for recipes and teas and other remedies. Because I think the first time that I went through that early postpartum period, I just sort of expected like, oh, there's no baby in me anymore. Like now I'm not pregnant, but the reality is like they talk about, a lot of traditions talk about the fourth trimester being the baby's first kind of 3 months of life. And it's so true, because even though baby is outside of our body at this point, it's really still like so connected to you. And in that time, when your body is like seriously going through all these changes, I just had to slow down, not expect so much of myself so quickly, and really like focus on nourishment, and kind of nesting and cocooning. And yeah, if you're used to moving around a lot, being like, I have a lot of vata and pitta in my constitution. And so like really embracing the slow, grounded foods and routines and everything else. It felt like a little bit of a challenge, but with my first, it illustrated that it was so important. So my second, I sort of embraced it right away. And that actually made a lot of difference in kind of how I experienced that early postpartum period. So yeah, everybody's different, but I'm a huge fan of Ayurveda, and I think there's a lot of interesting lessons that mamas can take from the lessons that it has to offer us.
Yeah, for sure. Is the book The First 40 Days?
Yes.
Yeah, I've got it on my Kindle, and I've like read it in like 3 days. It's so good. And I'll spend a little bit of time kind of over the holidays and beginning of January starting to like make some of those recipes and stuff. But yeah, this is I have a friend who is going through like a birth training right now. And she was very much like, you really need to focus on postpartum. She's like, make sure like you have some prep with that. She's like, I know you're on top of your to-do list and like your podcast episode. She's like, but don't forget to like plan for you, because she's like, everyone will want to hold your baby. And she's like, everyone will want to, play with them, but you need to be fed and you need to be taken care of. And it can't necessarily just be your partner doing it all the time, because they're going to be tired too. And I felt like that book was just really powerful. And then also, having studied Ayurveda and being really connected to that practice as well, I feel that that's definitely something that I want to do. And it's hard for me to imagine, like I was kind of reading, like I'm like 40 days is like a long time to just like be in and around your bed space. Like, I don't think I've ever spent that much time, in bed, being horizontal, not exercising, not working, not doing things. But it seems like if you can actually give yourself that time, your body is able to heal so much better. You're able to connect with your baby more and just really like set yourself up for success going forward with motherhood.
Yes, exactly.
So I'm going to give it a really solid shot. That's what I'm committed to. I'm going to get some bone broths and make some soups, and very much committed to spending time in bed.
Yeah, you're going to do great. If you have this knowledge and this preparation going on, even though it's hard, if you believe it's important, which I believe it is, then I think it will make all the difference. And I know everybody listening can't see Amanda right now, but she literally does look like she's glowing. And I can already see the mama in you absolutely manifesting itself. So yeah.
Oh, thank you for that.
I'm excited to get updates on how you're doing, but not during the period that you need to be cocooned.
Yeah, not during my 40 days of rest. But yeah, I feel like if anyone is kind of more, Pitta Vata, and you kind of understand like the Ayurvedic constitutions, I feel like it really helped me when they sort of explained like baby leaves and you've got this big empty sort of airy space. And so if you're already really Vata and you're trying to like be up doing the laundry and the cooking and taking your babe for a walk and maybe doing some exercise, it's like you're just getting more like cold and wind into your body, which isn't going to help you like produce good milk. It's not going to help you sleep well. And I feel like for me, that's what really connected, was like understanding these concepts and these principles and being like, it makes sense. Your body's just like been growing this human. It's made all this space for it. It's made an organ for it. And now all that's gone. And so we really have to give ourselves like warmth and grounding and time for that to shift back to kind of like our normal state pre-pregnancy.
Yeah, totally agree.
Amazing. Well, thank you for all of this, Jen. This has been so helpful and it's been such an awesome conversation. And I'm hoping that it helps some other mamas out there too, as they're preparing for their maternity leave. Can you share with people where they can go to follow along with you, learn more about you, all of that good stuff?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of our website at WeTravel is WeTravel.com. Personally, I am involved a lot in our Facebook group for retreat leader. It's called the Retreat Leader Hub. It's a group for retreat leaders. We can add that in the notes maybe. But yeah, otherwise, and anyone who wants to reach out to me personally, my email is jen@wetravel.com. I'm always happy to connect with other teachers, other entrepreneurs that are interested in yoga and well-being and travel. And yeah, I just want to thank you again for having me. I always love talking with you, and I'm so excited for you and for all the things that are coming in your life in the months to come.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been a treat to switch up the topic and talk about something different.
Yeah, it's awesome. Thank you.
All right, friends, I hope that you enjoyed that episode of the show with Jen Corley. Hopefully you learned a lot from her and everything that she had to share. I know that she was super, super helpful in giving me some good tips for how to outline my maternity leave and how to plan for being offline and staying in touch with people I work with, coming back, et cetera, et cetera. I also want to give a little shout out to OfferingTree. Thank you to OfferingTree for sponsoring this episode. Make sure you go check them out, offeringtree.com/M.B.Om. You can also join the support group that was mentioned earlier in the episode on Facebook, or you can send them an email at support@offeringtree.com. And thank you for listening to this episode of the show, and I will see you next week. Bye for now.